Revenge with Karen.
I knew the night was going to be a 3-drink minimum when Celine, CEO in waiting, daughter of the founder, and human LinkedIn post, clinked her champagne glass, made a little SHHH gesture, and said, "Let's raise a toast to the real talent on this project, and not just the ones who write boring compliance emails." The table roared. One guy actually slapped the back of his chair like he was at a goddamn comedy club. Another junior exec did that fake shocked face, like oh snap, before nodding at Celine with the fervor of someone trying to earn stock options through sycophancy. I just smiled, like it didn't hit, like it wasn't my work buried under her glitter, like I hadn't been the one who cleared the licensing maze, documented every red flag, and sent 5 separate risk memos, each met with the same polite thanks, Judith, we'll circle back. Spoiler, no one circled back. I sipped my seltzer because they didn't even spring for Pellegrino this year, and told myself what I always do, play nice. Look polished, be the calm in the Gala storm, but I felt it. That quiet hum under my ribs, not rage, not sadness. Just the sharp, surgical clarity of a woman who knows the room doesn't see her yet. And if you're listening to this thinking, wow, that's brutal, yeah, it was. So before this story goes off the rails, and trust me, it will, me and the team a solid, hit that like, smash that subscribe, because apparently 95% of you freeloaders listen without committing. Meanwhile, we're over here reliving our corporate trauma one story at a time, so support the madness, will ya? Anyway, back to the scene, Gala night. It was a sparkly corporate mess. Imagine a ballroom stuffed with egos in tailored suits, catered sliders posing as gourmet, and a DJ who looked like he was paid in exposure. Founder, Harold, who used to know my name, stood beside Celine like a statue that forgot how to blink. He hadn't made eye contact with me since the strategic realignment, where my role was downgraded from chief compliance strategist to legacy oversight consultant, which is HR speak for we don't want to fire you yet. Celine, meanwhile, had become the company's unofficial mascot for innovation. Translation: she repackaged existing work, slapped a new font on the slide deck, and presented it like she was Moses descending from Mount PowerPoint. Her latest stunt, a compliance automation pilot she claimed would revolutionize vendor licensing and save the company millions during the merger. Never mind that the framework was a barely modified version of one I'd co-developed with a third-party vendor last year. Never mind that the pilot skipped 3 legal checkpoints. Never mind that the licensing agreement didn't exist. She pitched it anyway, loudly, flashily, illegally, but no one questioned it because she wore confidence like a designer blazer. Because when you're a founder's kid, people assume the spotlight means you earned it. I'd warned them, quietly, professionally. I'd sent the emails, attached the documentation, highlighted the clauses in polite yellow. I even walked a folder to legal, nodded like bobbleheads on a dashboard, and said they'd review post-launch. So when I walked into that ballroom, hair curled, heels polished, nails the shade of neutral professionalism #4, I wasn't expecting applause. But I wasn't expecting that. My plan had been simple: show up, smile, sip, survive. Maybe corner one board member, drop a subtle reminder that vendor compliance wasn't optional, and disappear before dessert. Instead, got served a roast in stilettos, broadcast to a table of people who couldn't spell NDA if you stapled it to their face. And yet, I didn't interrupt, didn't correct, didn't even flinch. I just watched her. Celine, in her sequin jumpsuit that probably cost more than my quarterly bonus, sipping bubbly like she invented it, soaking in laughter that should have belonged to me. She twirled her glass like a wand, oblivious to the ticking beneath her feet, because what she didn't know, what no one at that table knew, was that earlier that morning I had forwarded a single email. One email, one clause, one quiet, documented time bomb. And tonight, I wasn't just here for seltzer and secondhand humiliation. I was here to watch the match hit the fuse. I hadn't planned to say anything. Honestly, I was halfway through my second seltzer, nodding at a manager from finance whose breath smelled like scotch and stress. Some suicidal sense of dignity nudged me forward. Just a simple walk, nothing theatrical. I even rehearsed it in my head. Congratulations, Celine. Impressive rollout. Easy, professional. The kind of thing a seasoned strategist says when the spotlight's aimed elsewhere. But of course, dignity's got terrible timing. Celine stood near the stage, surrounded by the company's newest golden children, people with freshly laminated titles like VP of Innovation Culture and Head of Agile Excellence. Her pilot had just gotten a standing ovation, the kind born more from champagne than scrutiny. Still, she soaked it in like she'd coded the damn thing herself. I crossed the floor, smiled, and said it. Just like I practiced. Congratulations, Celine. I know how much work went into this. She didn't even turn fully toward me. Just pivoted her glass and said, loud enough to shatter the illusion of civility, I'd rather toast my competitor than you, Judith. Her words didn't echo, they detonated. One guy coughed on his canapé. Another, a junior product lead I'd mentored through 2 failed audits, started laughing so hard he leaned into the chair next to him like this was the funniest thing he'd heard all quarter. Someone actually muttered, yikes, which in corporate speak is basically a live grenade. Celine smiled. Not at me, through me, like I was a ghost who wandered into her after-party. And I did what I always do when ambushed in heels. I smiled. Not because I wanted to. Not because I forgave her. But because I needed the room to underestimate me for 5 more hours. So I smiled like I hadn't just been gutted by a spoiled heiress in sequins. I smiled like I didn't remember every meeting she skipped, every document she skimmed, every clause she bypassed, because it was too legalese why. I smiled like I hadn't been told to let the next gen take point when she repackaged my compliance draft and called it Celine's Smart Stream Protocol. I smiled like my name wasn't still on the original NDA with the vendor. Like I hadn't co-authored the framework, she just sold to the entire company as her brainchild. Celine turned back to her circle, and just like that, I ceased to exist again. Ghost in beige pumps. That moment should have broken me, but instead it clarified everything. See, there's a switch that flips in women like me, the ones who keep the wheels greased and the audits clean while others take credit. The ones whose inboxes are graveyards of ignored warnings. We don't throw wine or scream across the dance floor. We take notes. We wait. We document. Because eventually, someone always asks the wrong question to the wrong person at the wrong time. And when they do, the only thing more satisfying than the truth is having proof of it. So I walked away. Not to pout. Not to cry in a bathroom stall while Don't Stop Believin' echoed over the speaker system. I walked away because I had already done what needed doing. That morning, while Celine was getting her blowout and probably rehearsing her applause lines in front of a gold-framed mirror, had logged one email, just one, to someone she didn't even know I knew, the lead counsel for the acquiring firm. Attached was the original NDA, the unlicensed framework, the signature page with a name that sure as hell wasn't mine but looked like it was supposed to be, and a single line from me. Per your interest in IP assurances, I believe this may require urgent review prior to acquisition terms. No threats. No accusations. Just a matchbook. Neatly placed. I wasn't here to fight. I was here to watch who smelled the smoke first. Back at the bar, one of the board members glanced in my direction. Just a flicker, like he was trying to remember something, or maybe he'd heard the whisper before the room moved on. The beauty of the game is this. If you play it long enough, you stop needing to win every round. You just wait for the one that matters. Let it go, Judith, Marcia whispered, placing her wine glass down like we were discussing floral centerpieces and not my public execution. It's just a party. She's young. She's under pressure. Don't make waves. Funny how when a man slaps your work into a PowerPoint and calls it innovation, it's mentorship. When a woman does it, it's empowerment. And when I try to hold either accountable, it's bitterness. I didn't respond, just tilted my head like I was pondering her advice, instead of fighting the urge to turn the entire gala into a legal seminar with witness exhibits and subclauses. Marcia, for what it's worth, meant well. She was part of the old guard, knew me from back when compliance still had a seat at the table, back before the board started fetishizing disruption like it was a new CrossFit routine. She didn't know what I knew, didn't see what I'd already seen. Flashback with me, just for a second, 3 weeks earlier, a Tuesday. The kind of day that smells like burnt coffee and impending disaster. I'm combing through Celine's compliance optimization framework because I recognize the architecture. It's mine, my bones, my structure. Dressed up in prettier fonts, sure, but the DNA is unmistakable. Worse, she's presenting it as final, as a saleable asset, as IP the company owns, clean and clear. Except it's not. Not by a mile. See, back when I still had influence, I'd worked with a third-party vendor on the original model. We hadn't finalized licensing. Why? Because Celine torpedoed the deal, said it was too complex for go-to-market, told me she wanted internal solutions only. 2 months later, she dusted off my work, gutted the risk controls, and branded it as hers. No license. No payment. No contact with the vendor. And the real kicker, someone forged my goddamn signature on a draft agreement. Sloppy work, too. Wrong date format. Misspelled my middle initial. I nearly laughed when I found it. Nearly. Instead, I drafted an email to legal. Subject line, IP risk urgent licensing question. Attached the flagged contract, pointed out the issues, asked for confirmation on final sign-off. No reply. Not that day. Not that week. Not ever. Maybe they didn't want to see it. Maybe Celine's star was too bright to cast shadows. Or maybe they decided I was past my prime, compliance Barbie in last season's Blazer, whispering about risk while the grown-ups closed deals. I opened the email again that night, hovered over delete. My finger trembled on the key, then something inside me snapped into place. No, I would not beg to be heard. I would not chase validation from people who called my experience a legacy constraint and my insight administrative overhead. So instead of deleting, I saved it, encrypted it, labeled it Quiet Fire Zip because, hell, I needed a little poetry in my rage. And I sent it, not to legal, not to HR, not to Harold, who hadn't looked me in the eye since he handed his daughter the keys to the kingdom. I sent it to someone far more dangerous, a man named Brendan Kim, lead counsel for the acquiring firm. Brendan and I went way back. Years ago, we'd locked horns over a service contract dispute that nearly tanked a merger. I won. He respected that. When I emailed him that night, I kept it brief. Brendan, I thought this might interest your due diligence team. Let me know if you'd like clarification. Time is sensitive. No drama. No threats. Just a torch, lit and placed gently at his doorstep. Back in the present, the Gala music swelled, a string quartet mutilating Coldplay. Celine was now mid-toast, thanking the brilliant team that helped make this possible, eyes twinkling like the victim of a Hallmark coma. Someone handed her a bouquet. I half expected her to start throwing roses. Marcia nudged me again. Seriously, Judith, don't ruin tonight. I looked at her. Really looked. Don't worry, I said. Tonight's already ruined. But not for me, not really. Because I'd already done the only thing that mattered. I'd stopped shouting and started documenting. The hotel bar was tucked just far enough from the ballroom that no one important dared be seen there. It was where the old guard drifted for real drinks and off-the-record whispers. And it's where I found him, Troy Bennett. Khakis, loafers, hair thinning like the company's ethics, director of strategic partnerships at Lexidine Systems, our third-party compliance vendor. And the man I hadn't seen in over a year. He was nursing a bourbon and blinking at the ceiling like he was trying to disassociate from whatever jazz remix was playing. Troy, I said, calm as concrete. He turned, and when his eyes focused on me, I saw it. Recognition, relief, and then guilt. Judith, he said, hell. I was hoping I'd run into you. I slid onto the bar stool next to him and signaled for seltzer. Because nothing pairs better with revenge than clarity. You guys still running audits through Compliance View? I asked, like we were catching up on local sports. He nodded, then paused. Yeah, well, not exactly. Your team stopped responding to support tickets after Q1. Celine said you'd moved on. I smiled, not warmly. She said that? Yeah, we thought it was weird, especially when she sent over a new draft of the framework. Claimed it was developed in-house. He sipped his drink, then added, didn't even finish licensing. I didn't react, just watched the bubbles in my glass. Did she send over the signature page? Yeah, looked like yours, honestly. But the timestamp was off, so were a few metadata fields. Our legal team flagged it and asked for confirmation. Never got a reply. My heartbeat didn't spike. It had already happened weeks ago, when I first saw the forged signature in our shared folder and realized someone had tried to kill the paper trail by burying it under 100 other PDFs. I just nodded. Thanks for confirming. Troy leaned in. Judith, I'm not trying to stir anything but that framework. It's not just unlicensed. It's under NDA, ours, yours. If it's in their M and a deck, that's a problem. No, I said quietly, pulling my phone from my clutch. If it's in their M and a deck, it's a bomb. He blinked. Are you gonna? Already did, I replied. I'd waited for this moment, not the dramatic confrontation, not the aha, you got caught climax. I'd waited for the facts to stack tall enough to cast a shadow even Celine's privilege couldn't block out. Brendan Kim had received 2 emails from me in 24 hours. The first was a quiet nudge. The second, sent exactly 12 minutes ago, was the hammer. Subject, urgent licensing discrepancy, asset 3C/smart stream body. Brendan, attached are the NDA draft signature page, not mine, and Lexidine's confirmation of breach. Per section 14.2 in your IP review packet, I believe this nullifies exclusivity and delays asset claim. 3 attachments. 1 bullet point summary. A polite, time-stamped footnote. Please confirm receipt. It wasn't vengeance. It was protocol. Back at the bar, Troy shook his head. You always were 3 steps ahead. I shrugged. I just read the contract. In the ballroom, Celine had taken the mic again, probably thanking her stylist or quoting Maya Angelou off a Pinterest board. The applause was rolling, thick, and unearned. The thing about spotlights is, they blind the one standing in them, so she didn't see Brendan walk into the back of the room. Didn't see him tilt his phone screen toward one of the board members. See the board member's face turn the color of overcooked shrimp. I slid off my stool. You going back in there? Troy asked. Eventually, I said, smoothing my dress, but not until they figure out what she did. I left the bar and walked the long hallway back toward the gala, heels echoing like a metronome. With each step, I shed a layer of silence I'd been taught to wear like armor. No one would call me bitter again. Not when the receipts were this clean, not when the signature wasn't mine, and not when the first domino had already tipped. This wasn't personal, it was structural collapse, and I had simply pointed to the crack. The murmurs started around the dessert table, somewhere between the salted caramel mousse and the gluten-free corporate lies. I felt them before I heard them. Side glances, tight smiles, a sudden overcorrection in tone. People just remembered I was still technically an executive, and not a ghost in sensible heels. First, it was Evan from Strategy, who gave me a nod he hadn't managed in the last 3 quarters. Then, Christine from Legal, who'd ignored every one of my flagged emails, asked how I was enjoying the evening. I said it was illuminating, and let the word hang like a light bulb over a crime scene. But the real moment came when Wallace Burnham, Roman 3, board member who smelled like generational wealth and imported cigars, cornered me near the coat check. He was always one of Harold's golf buddies. The kind of man who thought compliance was a department invented to punish ambition. I'd heard him once refer to regulatory frameworks as handcuffs for cowards, and yet there he was now, fidgeting with his cufflinks, eyes darting like he'd just found a mouse in his martini. Judith, he said, voice low, like this was some kind of backroom Cold War exchange. Is there something we should know about Celine's deliverable? I looked him right in the eye and said, if there is, I'm sure you'll find out soon enough. He blinked, twice, then cleared his throat and wandered off, probably to text someone who still believed Celine's pilot was a net positive asset and not a flaming IP violation on stilts. Let them sweat. See, there's power in not rushing to the mic, letting the fire build on its own oxygen. I'd spent years trying to get ahead of flames, flagging risks, putting out sparks before they caught. But this time, I was the one holding the match, and I had no intention of blowing it out. Somewhere near the back of the ballroom, I spotted Brendan Kim again. His tie was loosened, and he was standing close to a junior partner I didn't recognize, likely from M&A. The junior kept glancing at his phone, and at the gala stage, then back at Brendan, like he was watching a countdown he didn't understand. I already knew what was happening behind the scenes. Emergency morning meeting, 9:03 a.m. sharp. The buyer's legal team had called it the moment my second email hit their server. Their team would be reviewing ownership documentation, vendor agreements, and internal project logs. The moment they realized the licensing breach, entire valuation could be called into question. The deal? On pause. The asset Celine had sold as the golden goose, now a liability wrapped in sequins, but I wasn't worried. My paper trail was cleaner than the drink's menu. Every warning I'd sent was time-stamped. Every signature not mine was archived. Every NDA was still valid. The only thing I hadn't done was escalate, and that wasn't oversight. That was restraint. Because when you're a woman in rooms built to erase you, escalation is mistaken for hysteria, for bitterness, for overreaction. But silence has gravity. It pulls. Back in the ballroom, Celine was still orbiting her admirers, floating through conversations with that helium-filled charisma that made people think she was born for leadership. She laughed, touched arms, name-dropped, posed for photos with the founder. She looked invincible. But her project, Miracle Compliance Solution, was already under legal review by the one team in the building that didn't care how charming she was. And while she glowed, I gathered my coat. Not in a hurry, just methodical. I had nothing more to say tonight. I passed Christine from Legal again on my way out. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something. I raised my glass slightly in her direction. Not a toast, just a reminder of where I'd been, of what I knew, of what was coming. Because the gala, it wasn't the climax. It was just the spark. Celine was still glowing like the damn merger had already gone through, like her name was about to be stitched into the company's future in gold thread. I watched her pose for selfies with junior VPs like she was crowning them at a debutante ball. One even kissed her hand. We were all extras in a bad corporate rom-com, where the blonde gets the IPO and the credits roll before the lawsuits. She didn't know. Not yet. Not that the buyer's counsel, Brendan's team, had hit pause. Not that my email had triggered a full-blown IP review on a Saturday night. Not that her precious compliance framework, the one she'd practically tried to trademark with her initials, was under legal quarantine until someone could prove it wasn't stolen. Nobody wanted to be the one to tell her. Not Harold, not legal, not even Wallace, who looked like he might drop dead if his net worth dipped below 9 figures. So they all stood there, nodding along, clinking glasses, laughing at Celine's jokes while panic smoldered just beneath the ballroom floor. Me, I stood near the clock. Not figuratively. Literally. There was a massive grandfather clock near the bar, one of those decorative antiques someone probably justified as a heritage investment on a procurement form. Its second hand ticked like it had a grudge, and I let it anchor me while the room throbbed with oblivious celebration. I watched 8:37 p.m. click into place. That was the timestamp of the last message I'd received from Brendan. Received. Scheduling internal review tonight. Delaying signature until resolved. Will advise. I'd read it twice, once more just for the punctuation. Delaying signature. Until resolved. The deal Celine had been polishing like a trophy, the one she bragged about in press interviews before it was even sealed, was frozen midair. All because she thought NDAs were optional and signatures were decor, and I didn't need to do anything else. No shouting, no confrontation, no dramatic mic drop. The work was done. The fuse was burning. At 8:45 p.m., I watched Christine from legal whisper something to a man I didn't recognize, someone from the buyer's team. His eyes narrowed. His phone buzzed. At 8:48 p.m., Harold left the floor and didn't return. At 8:52 p.m., someone finally cut the music volume in half. But Celine, still floating, still basking in the buzz. She had no idea the asset she built her entire narrative around was radioactive. No clue that her licensing oversight was the legal equivalent of walking into an M and a deal holding a live grenade. And she definitely didn't know that the person who'd handed that grenade to Brendan was me. That's the thing about compliance. Done right, it's invisible. Like wiring in the walls, no one notices until the house starts smoking. I'd given them the wiring map. Now I was just watching for flames. At 9:02 p.m., lead auditor from the acquiring firm arrived at the venue. No announcement, no drink, just a whispered conversation with Brendan in the foyer. At 9:07 p.m., a message pinged onto someone's phone 2 feet from me. The recipient didn't read it, just closed their eyes and exhaled like they'd been underwater too long. And still, no one told her. Not because they wanted to protect her. Because they didn't know how to stop the fallout once it started. Because when you build an empire on borrowed frameworks and forged signatures, the collapse isn't a bang, it's a slow realization in a silent room. So I waited, cold, methodical, watching the second hand tick forward, knowing it wasn't just counting time anymore. It was counting down. It happened by accident, which makes it better. There was a last-minute reshuffle for the acknowledgments and closing remarks segment. Some poor intern handed a printed agenda with my name scrawled in Sharpie. I could practically smell the panic ink. Probably Harold's idea. Or someone from PR, trying to balance the optics. Couldn't have Celine look like she steamrolled the entire company without at least pretending to honor the legacy team. So the microphone found its way into my hand. A thin, silver thing that suddenly weighed more than my entire career. MC blinked at me like he expected me to pass. I didn't. I stepped up. Cleared my throat once. No fanfare, no slideshow. Just me and a mic in a room full of people who'd spent the last year pretending I didn't exist. Celine was seated stage right, angled perfectly for photos, bouquet still clutched like a newborn. I smiled. Good evening, I began, voice clear. Even, for those of you I haven't worked with directly, I'm Judith Mayers. I've spent the last 19 years leading compliance strategy and regulatory integration for this company. And while I wasn't part of tonight's feature presentation, I let that land with the softness of a scalpel. I'd like to thank the teams behind the scenes who ensure our innovations are not only bold, but legally sustainable. A few polite nods. Harold stared at the floor like it had started telling jokes. And before I turned things over, I continued. Have one small housekeeping note. Celine shifted. Just a friendly reminder. For those involved in the asset transfer, I'd recommend confirming vendor compliance per Section 7 before final signatures. A pause. I looked up. Locked eyes with Brendan across the room. He didn't blink. I turned back to the crowd. Some frameworks I added may still be under NDA. Silence. Not metaphorical silence. Real. You could hear the HVAC wheeze. Christine from legal dropped her pen. Phones lit up around the room like fireflies in a panic. The CFO whispered something into his watch. A VP from product physically turned in his chair to look at Celine, whose smile had frozen like a doll's face left in the sun. She wasn't breathing. Not visibly. And the people who'd laughed at her joke an hour ago, they weren't laughing now. A board member I hadn't spoken to in 2 years mouthed the words Section 7. Someone beside him. The woman he asked blinked like she didn't want to answer out loud. I handed the mic back to the intern. Didn't linger, didn't gloat. Just stepped off the stage, calm as ice on marble, and walked back toward the clock. Celine turned in her seat, eyes wide, locked on mine like I'd fired a gun instead of a sentence. Because she understood. Too late, but she understood. The room had pivoted. The deal she had framed as her coronation now smelled like litigation. She looked to Harold. He wouldn't meet her eyes, looked to legal. Christine was on her phone, walking fast toward the hallway. She looked back at me. And I, still holding a half-empty glass of seltzer, still standing in the same damn heels I'd worn through 3 budget cuts, raised it. A tiny nod, not a toast, not a farewell, just punctuation. The sentence was over. And I was the one who'd written it. Brendan Kim was gone before the band finished their butchered rendition of Don't Stop Believin'. No goodbyes, no coat check delay. Just a quiet word to the buyer's junior partner, a tap of his phone screen, and a straight-line exit like the room had suddenly become a crime scene. And maybe it had. Because 20 minutes after my housekeeping note, half the executive team stopped making eye contact. Christine from legal was camped in the hallway on her second phone, mouthing things like breach risk and framework chain of custody. Someone had pulled Wallace off the bar stool and into a stairwell. The founder's handshake tour ended mid-sentence. Celine, still sitting, still frozen. Someone tried to take her bouquet. She held onto it like it was a life vest and the room was the Titanic. And me, I left, not in a flurry, not escorted. I walked through the lobby like I'd just finished a shift, heels clicking soft against marble, clutch under one arm, phone in the other. By the time I got to the valet stand, the email had arrived. Subject, urgent licensing discrepancy, asset 3C/SmartStream. Brendan's reply was surgical. Confirmed. Framework flagged. Ownership in dispute. Signing deferred pending compliance resolution. Counsel to follow up Monday. Thank you, Judith. That was it. 4 sentences. The deal halted. The valuation uncertain. The Golden Girls project legally contaminated. Back upstairs, I imagined the scramble. Legal combing inboxes trying to reverse engineer a clean chain of approval. Only there wasn't one. Not for that framework, not for me. My flagged emails, all there, timestamps intact. The NDA still in effect. The approved signature fabricated. Every warning ignored, archived, and unread. Someone would ask the question. Maybe already had. Who approved the framework? The answer would come back. No one, or worse, Judith didn't. And no one else had the authority. That's the thing about compliance. It's quiet until it's the only voice that matters. Without clean licensing, the entire deliverable Celine had flaunted to the acquisition team was toxic. Not just oops, we forgot to dot an I toxic, voids clauses, triggers indemnity penalties, lawsuits on standby toxic. And if that framework was tied to the valuation itself was sinking. Later, I heard the board held a midnight call. Legal spun it as routine due diligence coordination, but inside sources, people who only remembered my name when they were in trouble, told me the call was chaos. Celine tried to explain. She said the license was in process. She blamed junior staff. She blamed legal. She blamed an old version of the contract. But the timestamps didn't lie. Neither did the forged signature. When someone asked if she'd gotten explicit approval from Judith Mayers, the silence on the line allegedly lasted 9 full seconds. Harold didn't defend her. Maybe he finally saw what I'd known for years, that a last name gets you a seat, but it doesn't guarantee you know what room you're in. At 1:12 a.m., I got a text from someone I hadn't heard from in months. They're calling you in tomorrow. Be ready. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I was already ready. It had been every day they ignored me. Every time I'd been asked to sit this one out or let marketing rephrase it for optics. Every moment I'd watched my work rebranded and my expertise filed under internal noise. Now, the board didn't need noise. They needed signal, and I was the only clear one left. The email came at 7:41 a.m. sharp. Subject line, boardroom access 9:03 a.m. East Lounge. No explanation. No CCs. Just a time, a place, and my name in bold. I arrived 10 minutes early. The East Lounge wasn't used often, too plush, too hushed. It smelled like old wood and old secrets. Long windows, heavy chairs, that kind of room. The kind where decisions are made with fewer words and more consequences. When I walked in, 3 people were already seated. Brendan Kim, cool and crisp in a navy suit that didn't wrinkle under pressure. 2 board members, Wallace, visibly deflated, and Camille, who used to nod right through every risk-flagged memo I sent without so much as a post-it follow-up. They nodded at me now, with intent, not courtesy. A 4th chair waited at the head of the table. I took it. There was no coffee tray, no small talk, just documents in crisp black folders and a silence so tight you could bounce quarters off it. Brendan flipped open a packet and began to read. Authorized use of protected frameworks under NDA invalidates claims of ownership. Under Section 14.2, such breach suspends all asset transfer claims related to the compromised deliverable. He paused, looked at me. Our offer is paused pending remediation. Camille shifted, lips pursed like she'd swallowed a lemon. Wallace rubbed his temple like he could erase the past 48 hours by massaging the regret into submission. Brendan continued, voice flat but final. However, upon internal review, it was determined that all original framework documentation, audit trails, and contractual clarifications were maintained and traceable by Miss Judith Mayers. He slid a folder toward me. In light of the current risk exposure, and with the goal of achieving regulatory resolution, we'd like to retain Miss Mayers as executive advisor to oversee vendor compliance, remediation, final valuation audits. I didn't blink, didn't reach for the folder immediately. Just let the moment sit there. The chair was warm now, not from heat, but relevance. Camille cleared her throat. Judith, we realize this may come as abrupt, but your history with the framework and your, thoroughness are what we need. Not what they wanted, not what they recognized, what they needed. The board hadn't chosen me, the breach had. I finally took the folder, opened it, viewed the title page. My name was at the top, no middle initials missing, no fake signature. Mine. I closed it gently. I'll oversee the remediation, I said, but we do it by the book, no shortcuts, full transparency. I want direct access to vendor communication, and I sign off on every line. Brendan nodded, no debate, because at that point I wasn't an option. I was the requirement. Camille opened her mouth to say something, maybe some PR version of an apology, but before she could, the door opened. It wasn't Celine, it was HR. They walked in with that slow, clinical gait, the kind reserved for transitions, the kind where the subject isn't invited to the room. Celine wouldn't be joining us, not now, not ever. No exit announcement, no farewell email, just the quiet kind of erasure reserved for people who flew too high on other people's wings. I stood, folder in hand, poured myself a glass of water from the pitcher on the sideboard. No fanfare, no toast request. Still, I raised it, not high, just enough. To competitors, I said, letting the silence absorb the meaning in their short careers. Brendan gave a quiet smile. No one laughed, not out of discomfort, out of respect. I didn't need the last word. I'd already written the last clause, and in that quiet, walnut-paneled lounge, they finally read it aloud. Big thanks, you legends of the old office days. Subscribe to keep the switch-flicking chaos alive. Your ex-boss is shaking in their loafers.